All right, Dr. Rachael, we're back. We're discussing the compulsive temperaments for our final video in this series on Temperament 101. So very exciting. Thank you for being here to talk about this.
I'm excited to be here.
Okay. So as you know, there are only 4 compulsive temperaments. There is no such thing as a phlegmatic compulsive. And that is the case because the phlegmatic is the most well-rounded of the temperaments, right?
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So we're going to talk about all 4, and we're going to address in each area of the temperament that takes place. For example, in inclusion, a melancholy, compulsive, and inclusion, and what that looks like, and then the others in control and affection. Compulsive is not a bad word. Okay, a lot of people think it is. They think that's a disorder of some kind, that you're sick, you've got something wrong with you. It's like obsessive compulsive disorder.
Right.
But that's not what we're talking about when we say compulsive. What does that mean? Could you give us a definition of that term?
Yeah, so when I am trying to go over a profile of somebody who has either multiple areas of compulsion in affection, inclusion, control, or just maybe one, the way I explain is, so you might go to Starbucks and get just a latte, and that would be just that true temperament of whatever it is. And if you got, let's say I ordered an espresso, how about that? I might get a double espresso, and that would be the compulsive aspect of it. So you just kind of get a double shot of whatever the temperament is. So
it's the same thing. A melancholy and a melancholy compulsive are the same thing. It's just a little more extreme, a stronger version of the melancholy. Okay. Yeah. So this is straight from the book, all right? And by the book, I mean Creation Therapy. That's where we do a lot of our studying.
Right.
That's the Arnold profile system and what they have taught for several decades about temperament. This is what they say about the sanguine compulsive. The sanguine compulsive is a person driven to socialize with people. It does not matter how many times sanguine compulsives socialize or how many people they are with. They are constantly looking for new ways to socialize and more people to be with. And it goes on and on, of course. But how would you advise a sanguine compulsive in inclusion to address their need for constant interaction and reassurance from people? And I mean an insatiable need, like they want that every day.
Insatiable. It would wear me out to live with sanguine compulsive. Just because I don't need that much interaction, and then to have to be with someone who needs that much, I want to look for ways to meet that, to help them meet that need. I can't imagine having that much of a drive to be around others. However, the sanguine compulsive really is going to seek out every opportunity. And remember back when we were talking about the sanguine temperament is one that they will kind of take on whatever the group is doing. And so the people that they associate with really matters, because they will take on a lot of those qualities just so that they can be included and go along with things, and be a part of the crowd. So what I usually try to encourage sanguine compulsives to do is one, just to realize that they're not going to die if they don't interact with somebody. Like, it's actually okay. They're not going to blow up. And they don't have to act on every urge, because the other thing about it is that the more they interact, then the more interaction they actually want. And so they do need to learn how to temper it a little bit. But let's just say they do a little bit. Go be a part of a church body. Go sign up for a small group. Sign up for a Bible study. But sign up for areas that you know are going to keep you in the straight and narrow, that are going to actually benefit your life, that are going to feed into you in wonderful ways.
Right. I'd like to get on to the supine compulsive now, because The supine is so interesting. You know, it's just such a fascinating temperament because there's such a strong desire for socialization with others, just like the sanguine compulsive has that drive and tends to wear everyone out and to, you know, be excessive and stifle people. But with the supine, they don't wear people out. They want what the sanguine wants, that constant socialization with other people, with large numbers of people. But no matter how many times they're included, they will never feel accepted or wanted. And a lot of times people will think the supine compulsive has something wrong with him or her. And that's not true. You know, and like what you were talking about earlier, you know, we're not talking about a disease of the mind.
No, not
We're
at
talking
all.
about a style, a type of individual that God created, and it's His perfect design, and we're all unique, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses. But when it comes to the supine compulsive, you know, they might also be convinced based on what other people say that there's something wrong with them. So how do they get out of that very negative kind of thinking and very self-conscious thinking so that they can truly live in the image of God, the design that He created them to be?
Yeah, the supines really tend to be filled with a lot of inner turmoil, and their self-talk includes a lot of self-rejection because they are assuming that they're not included in things. If somebody doesn't physically come up and say, hey, come with us to go do whatever, you know, if they don't get an actual invitation, they're not naturally going to be ones to assert themselves. And so they have that compulsion, if you think of it like an internal motor, just driving them to be around people, which they'll get there. They will actually get there. They'll show up at church, or they'll be there at the party. But then it's almost like, you know, cats got their tongue. They won't really initiate with other people.
Right.
And so then people think, oh, well, they don't want someone to walk up and welcome them, that people misread them. And so then because the supine compulsive is giving off this air of distance and that they don't want to be spoken to, people don't, because they're trying to read body gestures and stuff like that. And so what they have to learn is just to be a little bit more assertive. And the thing is, you're only gonna net the balls that you shoot, right? Sometimes they need to be told that, yeah, sometimes you will be rejected, sometimes you will be accepted and invited in. But if you don't throw the ball, or if you don't, in other words, go up to somebody and assert yourself, you're not going to know. If you just sit back, you're not throwing any balls to even net one, you know? So they have to be taught to get out of that uncomfortable feeling, that uncomfortable part of them that doesn't want to assert themselves. And they do that because they think they're not worthy. There's just a lot of this unworthiness.
That ability to accept themselves and to finally be comfortable in their own skins is harder for them than just a regular supine in inclusion, right? Isn't it more difficult typically?
I don't know any supine that I can think of that still doesn't struggle with that. I don't know anyone who has fully overcome that as a supine compulsive.
So it's a lifelong process.
It is. It does get easier, and it's just that's the first go-to is that rejection and I'm not included. But they can do the self-talk. We can give them the tools to say, hey, Jesus loves you, Jesus accepts you, and you always have a place at His table. These are Jesus-loving people, and come on in. You're just part of the team, please.
Right.
So, yeah, but they're just not naturally gonna think that.
Let's talk about another compulsive for the inclusion area, and that's the melancholy. The book says the melancholy compulsive is a person who withdraws from social situations and associations. It does not matter how many times you prove yourself. This person will be distrustful and rejecting. And you know, there is a debate about this in the Christian counseling community. Some say we should trust people unless they prove themselves untrustworthy, and others, like a lot of melancholy compulsives out there, they wouldn't trust anyone until it's proven to them. And not just melancholy compulsives. There's a lot of other temperaments that are, you know, a lot of people out there that are like this because they've been burnt in some way. They've been offended, or something has happened to them. And they thought, I don't deserve this, you know, and I don't want to go through it again, so I'm going to protect myself. You know, what do you say to that kind of a person who's saying that?
Yeah, so, you know, for instance, the sanguine trusts everybody, right? They're the golden retriever. They're just, yeah, welcome everybody in.
Typically.
But the melancholy compulsive is the one that is very self-protected, and they do tend to judge others more harshly because they judge themselves so harshly. They have a very high standard for themselves.
They're very critical people.
Very critical. And so teaching them about their temperament is key as to all of them. But also just framing it in such a way that maybe it's not so much about judging people, or are they trustworthy, are they not, are they children of God, and can you appreciate somebody in front of you for how they are right now, you know, just as a child of God, and what attributes do you see? You don't have to like them, you don't have to hang out with them, but you know, you do need to see their value, because the Lord sees their value, and of course died for them. So having them not be in that role of judge is usually pretty helpful, I've found. And then they're able to ease up on themselves a little bit too, because then they realize, oh, well, you know, the Lord is not judging me that way. And so, you know, I can back off too.
Right.
So.
Let's get to the last one for the compulsives in the inclusion area, choleric compulsive. Saving the best for last. That's a temperament that's constantly looking for people to associate with on the surface, yet they want to associate with almost no one. Those they associate with are people they can use, dominate, and motivate. And here's the kicker. It does not matter how many times compulsive cholerics use people or how many accomplishments they undertake, it is never enough. And this is kind of hard because, you know, it's not a sin to try to use someone if you're motivating them for a godly goal. The sin is manipulation for an evil purpose. And so, we have a lot of biblical examples of using people, but at what point does it cross the line and become narcissism and domination, and tyrannical behavior and dictatorial behavior? And secondly, what would you say to the choleric compulsive in inclusion about how they ought to be thinking about others, how they should view the people around them?
Yeah, that's a learning curve for the choleric compulsive. But so narcissists are made, they're not born. Choleric compulsives are born with that temperament. And so clearly God has a very good use for that temperament in somebody.
Right.
The benefit of having a child grow up in a home or be exposed to Christianity early on is that they are able to actually see God as greater than they are and have some reverence for God. It's much harder for a choleric compulsive later in life to see the value of God, because a lot of times, if that hasn't been tempered along the way, they see themselves as God. It's just a hard thing for them. It's not impossible, but that is a very hard thing.
They tend to replace God in their lives with themselves.
They do.
They put themselves on the throne. And so what are some counseling...
And they're very successful at whatever they put their mind to. So meaning...
Right.
I say successful meaning what they set out to do, they are often able to achieve. I'm not talking all the time about money, but they do go hand in hand. But along the way, they tend to really misuse people, as we were talking about before. Manipulation is a favorite tactic
Right.
of the choleric compulsive, and really they just use people and call it friendship,
Right.
or use people and that's their marriage. And it's, you have a spouse who's really suffering because their needs are not getting met, because the choleric compulsive just takes up so much space and is not others oriented at all. And so teaching them the value of other people, I wrote down, the Lord has to actually seem more powerful than they are to help give them a little bit of a grid of how to come down off of themselves. So if they can kind of get that a little bit, it's very helpful for them to kind of see the world in a different way. Another thing is to show a choleric compulsive different leadership styles, because one euphemism a lot of teachers will say is, oh, this child is a great leader, right? They get a lot of comments, wonderful leadership skills. Well, yes, but I mean, they're also tyrants. They're tyrant leaders, right? They're little dictators a lot of times. And with training and good parenting, that parent can help a child not be so forceful, not be so powerful, and show them the value of other people next to them. When you get older, let's say, and someone our age comes in for counseling, and they haven't had that as a
If they do come in, they rarely will.
Yeah, it's only going to be because their spouse suggested it, and they're about to lose their marriage or something. They're certainly not going to come in on their own.
Right.
But if they can be shown servant leadership, or just other ways to serve, for instance, preschool teacher, serving little children, but actually nurturing them and showing them the value of kindness. The choleric compulsive blows over all of that stuff because to them it's kind of weak. They don't see the value in it. They don't need it. And so they may not even be aware.
Right. All right, we're going to move on to the control area now, specifically the sanguine compulsive. The book says the sanguine compulsive possesses the compulsive dependent, independent conflict swing. When needing to take on responsibilities and make decisions, a compulsive sanguine's ability will astound people. No matter what he or she does, how well he or she does it, or how much recognition he or she receives, it will not be enough. And as we have discussed before, sanguines in control, it's a very, very rare temperament. Sanguine compulsive in control is even more rare. I've never seen one in my life. And so if someone does present with this particular state of mind, the dependent, independent swing, and even when they're in this independent phase, they'll make the cholerics run and cover. Oftentimes,
Yeah, they will.
They are extremely strong-willed and very driven people. But how would you advise him or her to find stability in situations where they're not getting their needs met by the people around them?
Yeah, so they really are going to swing a lot, and they are going to go from looking highly, highly diligent and maybe even acting out in ways that are not pleasing to them, and then they're going to go into a shame mode of trying to collect themselves, if you will. That's going to be part of that swing. And so to have a phlegmatic spouse would just be wonderful.
Ideal situation.
Yeah, to help stabilize that sanguine compulsive, because they really do. They're going to need people around them to help them feel stabilized and to actually handle the details in their life that the sanguines are just going to gloss over. They're going to have, in one part of the swing, they're going to be able to accomplish a lot of those details, but they're not going to finish it out, because then the swing comes back. So if they can have some people in their lives that can come behind them or beside them and finish those details, let them be the ideas person.
Right. Okay, we're going to get into the supine compulsives now. The Creation Therapy book says supine compulsives have a driving need to have others control them, take care of them, and help them make their decisions. Their behavior, either good or bad, manipulates the people around them to meet this need. The more you help supine compulsives make decisions and take on responsibilities, the less they will do for themselves. And that's, of course, very ominous, because what is the hope then of helping them? How could we possibly make a difference in their lives if by helping them we just drive them to more and more dependency? So ultimately what we're looking for is them becoming more independent. We don't want to help them and then they become dependent and less confident in making decisions on their own. So what would you tell the family members about the enabling of the supine compulsive and control and making them complacent?
Well, enabling really is the perfect word for that. And I like to always say, I'm not the originator of it, but don't do for somebody else what they can do for themselves. So really, you don't do things for them, but not in a mean way. I think it's always worth it, let's say in a family system, to have a family meeting and have a division of roles in the family, so that the supine knows what is expected of them. They want to contribute. They want to. It's just that if they can get away with not, then then there you go. They're not. But they always want to be included in the decision making, but they don't want to feel responsible for the final decision. So that's a really key thing to remember working with supine in this situation, the supine compulsive, because they want to be heard. They have great ideas, very valuable ideas, but they are limited in terms of how much responsibility they themselves want to take on. So they're not going to be suggesting something that they can then just spearhead and take, some huge job. They're just not going to volunteer for that. But if it's deciding what to do next, what city to move to, what vacation to take, they want to be included in that, and it's very worthwhile. They have great things to offer. And then just trying to get in a little bit of a scheduling or routine with things that they do specifically for others. They have that servant's heart. They love to do it, but it just needs to be defined.
Okay. So the family members out there they're wondering, what should I do? They do have to be proactive, and they're not enabling. Bottom line here is they're not enabling by including them in the decision. They're doing the opposite. They're actually motivating the supine compulsive.
Yeah, they're essentially drawing them out, right? And then the supine compulsive really needs to learn how to be more assertive and advocate for themselves. So if there's something that they want or a need that's not getting met, they need to advocate for themselves and say, I'm feeling this way, would we be able to do something different, and help them with that. So they're great collaborators.
Great. So we got to move on to the melancholy compulsive now. It says in the book that they fear unknown situations or of making fools of themselves and of looking incompetent. They are driven to appear competent and in control. This compulsive need will prevent them from moving into the unknown and keep them fighting to maintain control over their lives without making decisions for other people. So what is the best path forward for this extremely self-conscious temperament? They're so critical, self-critical, and they have this great need of being competent and in control. And it seems impossible to connect with their own feelings and needs, or for them to connect with the feelings and needs of others when they're like this, in this disconnected state. So how would you advise them to start making changes in their thinking so that they can be self-assured and confident and stop worrying about everything.
They do. They're going to think about every possible outcome, that's for sure. I think just start explaining to them that we just need to live for the audience of one. We live to please the Lord, to love and please Him alone. And, there really isn't anything that we can do wrong that is going to mess it up forever if we're believers in Him.
Right.
It's okay. Like He blesses the effort. He is full of mercy and grace. And so that tends to help them a lot. It also helps them start to bring on a little bit of self-compassion, which is a hugely foreign concept to the melancholy compulsive, because they are so harsh on themselves.
Hypercritical.
And
procrustian. They try to force everything into this perfectionistic box.
They do. And it's a gift and it's a curse. One, God is the only one who is perfect. And so they can dethrone themselves also from that role and just allow some imperfections along the way. When I'm working with melancholy compulsives, a lot of times, I'm just saying effort, just getting out there, just trying, getting out of that analysis paralysis is a big deal. And just start doing something. Don't worry about the outcome. Just make the effort, and the other stuff will come. And by them starting to actually implement a little bit of, like I was talking about, self-compassion, they are then able to transfer that on to other people too, and show more mercy where it wasn't evident before, just because they know how hard they're trying. But it all comes from that inward perspective that they shoot outward to everybody else.
That's awesome. All right, now we're going to look at the choleric compulsives in control. These people are constantly looking for others to dominate and ways to gain more and more profit and power. And the problem is, no matter how much control they have over others, it will never be enough to satisfy this need. And when I read this in the book, it really made me think of Luke chapter 12. The parable of the rich fool. This man was on a mission to store up wealth for himself. He packed barns full of grain, and he said, "Oh soul, now I can rest," and so on, because I have stored up all these things. And then, of course, the Lord says, "You fool, tonight your soul is required of you." And this really, I thought about that when I started reading about the choleric compulsive in control. By the way, I'm a choleric compulsive in control. And this is something that we have to watch out for. And I don't mean wealth always, because I'm not saying that every choleric compulsive is going to struggle with greed and lust for money. But there's definitely a desire for accomplishments, for achievements, for power, for domination, for control. And what can you do with all these accomplishments where you're going? The Lord tells us, we ought to store up for ourselves treasures in heaven, not on the earth where moth and dust destroy. And so we ought to be thinking of things with a heavenly perspective, with a godly mindset, of course. But how does a choleric compulsive in control, learn to slow down and think of their accomplishments as things that are earned or things that are achieved for the Lord's sake and not for their own?
Well, I think that's just it. Why are you doing it? Is it for the Lord? Did He ask you? Or is this just your idea?
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to start. But as a choleric compulsive, you do accomplish many things every day. I think of the things that you've even put out YouTube-wise and all across social media, and I haven't done that at all. So what you accomplish in a day is very different to what I accomplish in a day in terms of checking the box off, moving things forward, and the world needs people like you.
Well, and that can be detrimental because we don't want to stop, we meaning us choleric compulsives in the world, we don't want to stop and just smell the roses, you know, or relax. Sometimes we're just so adamant about getting things done. I have to, you know, check every box and mark every achievement before it's too late, before time is out.
Yeah, exactly. So allowing others to influence you is a big deal.
Yeah.
And who you allow to influence you, obviously, as a choleric compulsive, you would be rather choosy about that, but not even considering that you can use the person for personal gain. They just need to be wise. They need to be for you, and they need to be somebody that you can trust, because choleric compulsives aren't always so trusting. But they do need to be trustworthy individuals that you would allow to influence you. And that can help kind of temper some of that drive. Because if you're willing to actually submit yourself to somebody who is, let's just say, greater than you, right? And I'm not talking, obviously the Lord is the greatest, but I'm talking a human being, somebody that you admire, then you will stand down, if you will, and actually take their advice, heed their advice to some degree, not totally, but if somebody you admire says, you know what, it's time for you to spend a vacation with your family right now. This project needs to be tabled. You've been working too hard, and they're hurting. The choleric compulsive isn't going to notice that their family's hurting. They're not going to have nurtured their family along the way, because the mission is the goal.
Right.
And the thing is, at the end of the day, our relationships are the goal.
Right.
That's our mission. And so
we can't waste precious time on just marking a check mark on a box. We have to think about the people.
Can get very distracted with the mission and forget the actual mission. So just perspective. So they need to reframe things.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rachael. We don't have any time to cover the affection area, but we already discussed a lot. So this has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure our viewers have learned a lot. So thank you.
I hope so. It's been great.